All right, let me go ahead and start. Hello, my name is Brent Smith. I have a few prepared remarks here. On behalf of the Adult Education Committee here at St. Stephen's, welcome to this virtual Peace Roundtable of 2021. The annual Peace Roundtable was held in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, other peacemakers, and Dr. King's vision that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And as usual, our roundtable program is being recorded. Our topic this year is microaggressions, oops and ouches. As we on the Adult Education Committee prepared for this roundtable, we learned that microaggressions actually do create barriers that are impediments to peace for us all, including barriers that alienate people of color. In the problem that we examine today, there may have been a situation in which you noticed a friend stopped communicating with you and learned later they were offended, and this had led to a degree of alienation. In recognizing an unintentional microaggression such as this, you might say, oops, I'm sorry I hurt you. On the other hand, when you receive an offensive remark, you might say, ouch. So for years, St. Stephen's has made it a priority to use language that reflects our values and to create a style in worship and throughout our church life, which is intentionally inclusive. So today's study in microaggression is another step in building our peacemaking skills and reducing barriers between us, including barriers from racially based microaggressions. The oops and ouches technique of recognizing the use of offensive language is one way we can be transparent in our conversations and become more intentionally inclusive. So for today's program, Jennifer Ahrens-Sims, will be our special guest in helping us understand the dynamics surrounding microaggressions. Dee Fink will be a program moderator, and several of our church members will be small group discussion leaders. So with that, here's Dee to moderate today's program.
Okay, well, let me add my welcome to Brent, to everybody for joining us. I think you're going to enjoy this and finding it an exciting and interesting. When Jennifer introduced the whole concept of microaggressions to the Adult Education Committee, it was a new concept for me and I think for some of the others. I had to get, it took me a little while to get my head wrapped around it, and that's when we realized, but as we did, we realized it truly was an important concept. So I'm trusting that something approaching that will happen for a lot of the others of you today, although some of you may have already heard this. If you looked at the structure of the program, there's really two major segments. The first one is the one we're just about to start, where with Jennifer taking the lead on that, just to help us understand what are microaggressions. Once we spend some time on that, then we're going to go to the second major segment, which is where we're going to break into small groups and spend some time practicing and learning how to respond when either we or someone else commits a microaggression. So we want people to be able to have some responses sort of on hand, if you will, for that. So that's the two major segments. I'm going to be to help us transition from the different parts of this to another. But with that, let me stop and let Jennifer begin her comments, helping us understand just what microaggressions are. Jennifer?
Thank you very much, Dee. I'm just going to make note of the time. Okay, so I wanted to light a candle because I feel like this is very much a spiritual practice that we're doing here today. And as we all contemplate the light of Christ, it's important, I think, to remember that it does take courage to walk into the light. And there's some vulnerability that goes along with that. And so I light this Christ candle as a remembrance of the light of Christ that shines amongst us. And I also wanted to begin with a introduction, sort of a prayer. So if you will pray this prayer with me, it's called I Will Sing a New Song by Howard Thurman. And it goes like this. The old song of my spirit has wearied itself out. It has long ago been learned by heart. It repeats itself over and over, bringing no added joy to my days or lift to my spirit. I will sing a new song. I must learn the new song for the new needs. I must fashion new words, born of all the new growth of my life, of my mind, of my spirit. I must prepare for new melodies that have never been mine before, that all that is within me may lift my voice unto God. Therefore I shall rejoice with each new day and delight my spirit in each fresh unfolding. I will sing this day a new song unto the Lord. Amen. Well, I wanted you all to know that we have been talking about this since October. And at that point, we did not know how the election was going to turn out. But I just want to say that I think that what we're doing right now fits very nicely with President Biden's call for unity and sort of reconstructing our social fabric. And I also want to dedicate this program, if I might, to all the born Indigenous and people of color, BIPOC people that I have offended out of my own ignorance and out of my overzealous curiosity and desire to just be an ally, because I have done my fair share. I wanted to share an experience that I had as a younger person when I was about 30 years old. Frankie Johnson, you guys remember Frankie? Yeah. Well, she had come to McFarland for something. This was about 2005. And I remember her saying to, it must have been the pastor at the time, that, and she was referring to me, she said, we need to toughen her up. And that really stuck with me when she said that. And I think as time has gone on, I've understood that in different ways. But the way I understand it in this context is that maybe she was suggesting that my experience as a white female had made me a bit fragile. And that's where we get that phrase white fragility, which describes the difference between Black experience and white experience in the US. When I was in seminary, I was introduced to the womanist tradition, which comes from the experience of Black women who live at multiple intersections of oppression, mostly, or namely race, class, and gender. And it was there that I became impressed, like literally they made an impression on me, the womanist tradition. And I realized that they had such strength and resilience, and that was missing from my life. And so I literally was baptized by these prophetesses of this womanist tradition. I was baptized in their rich tradition of tough women who stand for the gospel and who really stand for all people, not just their own. And so, like many of you, by reading and study, I was apprenticed by them. But the cognitive formation that I had only took me so far. And so I wanted to have experiential training. And what I did personally was that I committed to making friends with persons of color. I committed to making new friendships only with persons of color so that I could learn and grow. Excuse me. So none of us, if while we're working or playing with a friend, and if we hear them say, ouch, and we come to find out that we've caused them a paper cut, none of us would like that, because we know just a paper cut, even though it's small and minor, it hurts a lot, doesn't it? And you can have 1 or 2 paper cuts and you can manage those just fine. But imagine if you have your whole body covered with paper cuts. And so none of us would want to do that to our friends, right? If we hear them say, ouch, and we realize we caused the paper cut, we might say, oops, I'm sorry. And then likely we would be more careful, right? Or more intentional about not giving any more paper cuts to our friends. Well, that's kind of like how microaggressions are. They seem small and superficial, but to the bearer, they can cause a lot of pain. 1 or 2 are okay, but repeatedly over time, they're cumulative, and they take away resources from the body and from the person as they attempt to deal and live with life. And so the things that we can do without the paper cuts are more than persons who have to deal with those things. So Regarding intentions, I just wanted to point out that Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about intentions. You know, I could have said, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. But I'm going to really encourage us to shy away from our own intentions today. They become secondary. And so in his book, Between the World and Me, Coates is talking about the Dukes of Hazzard and how he loves the Dukes of Hazzard. You guys remember that show, right? And part of the song, it says, just some good old boys never meaning no harm. Just some good old boys never meaning no harm. And he writes, this was a mantra for the dreamers, if there ever was one. But what one means is neither important nor relevant. So what we have to know about our intentions is that they become secondary to the experience of the other. And if we want people to feel safe, then we have to be aware of the things that cause the harm and do our best to avoid those things. So while we sometimes enter the world of persons of color by reading books like Coates's books, we also have the opportunity to step away from that and to not experience the pain. But for them, it's, you know, a daily occurrence, sometimes multiple times a day. So what are microaggressions? There's lots of ways to define them, but I would say they're mostly usually thoughtless, unexamined statements, and they happen in everyday exchanges, and they're denigrating. They're denigrating to certain individuals, usually because of their group membership. If you read Ibram Kendi's book, what was the one that we just read with Kay and Jeannie Miller? There was a book study. And in that book, Ibram Kendi says, they're an individual misuse of personal responsibility, suggesting that we have a responsibility, of course, for what comes out of our mouth. And we don't knowingly want to hurt someone. They can come in the form of micro assaults, insults, and invalidations. Those are the three forms that are often talked about. They're micro because they seem small, like those little paper cuts, but over time, they have a deleterious impact on the physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being of others. They have been called not so subtle forms of discrimination. They've been called death by 1,000 cuts. And they really are slights that reveal a larger pattern of injustice, specifically racial injustice that we're talking about today. So here's some examples, and you probably have heard some of these. When I look at you, I don't see color. Or another version of that is, I'm colorblind. I see everybody the same. We're all one race. We're all part of the human race. Or maybe you're hearing somebody comment about a coworker and she said, I noticed you let your braids out. Are you going to wear your hair like that to the client meeting? Talking about how African-American women might wear their hair. And then this other one, everybody can succeed if they just work hard enough. These are all forms of microaggressions. And they can be subtle statements, but they can also be actions and behaviors. So a person may not even speak a word, but the way they carry themselves and the actions that they take can be a microaggression. For example, interrupting somebody as they're talking, or speaking over them, or even for them. And also not giving credit when credit is due. So where do they come from? Well, they come from unexamined and sometimes even examined ideas and beliefs about whole groups of people. We might call these biases or stereotypes. And what happens over time is that these beliefs and ideas begin to influence how we think others should be or how they should act, or really we're deciding what's normal. What is normal? And when we fail to examine and to change our practices, we are more likely to commit a microaggression. For example, I may have worked really hard in believing that all people have equal not equal intelligence, but the ability to be intelligent. I might think that there's no difference genetically or otherwise that makes one group of people smarter than the other. I might work really hard. But then let's say we hear an African-American person speak, and then I say, oh my gosh, she's so articulate. That would be an example of a microaggression, because that assumes that there's some reason that her ability to articulate is special, that I'm somehow surprised that she can talk well, or that she would live up to the group norm that I have. Perhaps I thought that she was going to talk more rough or less articulate, or that she was going to use ebonics. But then again, that's degrading another culture and saying that does not live up to the norm in my in-group. So we have to really critically examine the things that may not even rise to our consciousness, but they come out in microaggressions. Can a microaggression come from a well-meaning person? Yes, absolutely they can. I wrote here, unless unicorns are real, then none of us are exempt from the effects of racism. And if you think that you're exempt, well, then you might be a unicorn. So let's now talk about, did a microaggression just occur? Because here in a minute, you're going to have a chance to practice being in a situation with a microaggression. So the first step in being an ally, and I think that many of us aspire to be an ally and to be anti-racist. The first step in those things is to determine if a microaggression just occurred. And so if a statement expresses a bias or a stereotype or a prejudice, then yes, it's a microaggression. Now, if there's uncertainty about the origin of the statement, you can assume it's a microaggression. If it takes your cognitive resources to try to figure out if it was one, then it's a microaggression. If you're still not sure, then go ahead and confer with somebody. Verify or validate with another person. Did you hear what I just heard? I think that may have been from an origin of bias. I think that was a microaggression. So then the next question becomes, well, should I respond? And that's always for your discretion. But I would say that it's important that we empathize with persons who experience microaggressions, because we have to remember that on a psychosocial and a physical level, that there are stress hormones that influence us and impact us and disrupt things. They disrupt our performance, they disrupt our sleep patterns. And so we might consider, somebody is being caused stress by this microaggression. I know I don't do well under stress. So I want to speak up on behalf of this microaggression that just occurred. Diane Goodman wrote this: the emotional labor should not have to fall on people from marginalized groups. We all have that personal responsibility to speak up and say something. But then if empathy is not enough appeal, I would ask you to put the risk in perspective, because the risk that we take by responding to a microaggression, in my opinion, is mild compared to the risk that people of color take in doing everyday things, like walking down the street carrying something, or sending their kids to school, and so on. So if we don't respond, according to the Harvard Business Review, we are reinforcing our white privilege and undermining a culture of inclusion. So maybe the question is, should I respond now or should I respond later? Maybe I do better after I have time to think about it. Is it worth tackling, and how is it going to affect the relationship I have with others? How am I responding create a sense of belonging for more people? For the person who made the microaggression, for the person who received it. And finally, I think we have to ask ourselves, am I going to regret not responding? Sometimes that regret is enough motivation to speak up and say something. And if I don't respond, does that convey that I personally accept racist behavior? So like I said before, in a few minutes, you'll have a chance to do some role playing and see about responding to microaggressions. So how to respond? Well, it's a microaggression, so even a micro intervention will help. Dr. Daryl Sue says, unless adequately armed with strategies, microaggressions can occur so quickly that they're oftentimes over before a counteracting response can be made. So just by saying something is a way to correct the injustice. It may not cancel it out, but at least there's been a statement otherwise, and not just letting the racist statement stay. So think up a strategy and practice it and have it ready. You would probably want to disarm the person by avoiding defensiveness. Don't hint that the person is racist, but that the statement was racist. One can even explain that this is uncomfortable and is awkward, but if we do it together, then maybe we can both get something out of it. And if we address the microaggression, we get to grow as allies and as anti-racist, and we build a more inclusive community. You can also offer a micro affirmation, which has been referred to as the antidote to a microaggression. Micro affirmations are small and brief affirmations of other people's competence and their values. When you give a micro affirmation, you acknowledge people and you can counteract that negative consequence of the microaggression. You can give a micro affirmation by just nodding your head when somebody is speaking, or publicly backing somebody up, or giving them your complete attention. So we're going to watch a video later on about how to respond when you're getting called out. And we have to remember that if we get called out, it doesn't make us a bad person. We have to remember that our intent becomes secondary to impact. And so if we suspect that we've used a microaggression, or we're sure that we've committed a microaggression, we can just simply say, oops, that was offensive and I'm sorry. Or you can say, oops, I see that you're saying that that statement was hurtful to you, and I'm so glad that you pointed that out to me. So if you are called out, this comes from Renee August. If you're called out, don't be angry that you were called out. Be angry that the thing came out of your mouth in the first place. Be mad that you are a part of this racist system, that the microaggression would come out of your mouth. I think for St. Stephen's, the main thing that we're thinking about is that we value inclusion. And if we're saying, backhanded statements like microaggressions, it's hurtful. And people will feel like St. Stephen's is not a place for them to belong. Maybe that they're an outsider or an other or unimportant. And as Jeannie mentioned this morning, we have a long history of working very hard and very intentionally to grow our language to be as inclusive as it can be for gender. And I think this is the next step that we can do to help more people feel comfortable when they're in our presence and in our company. And this is something that we can do not only when we come together as a church, but also when we're in our various workplaces or places that we frequent, like the supermarkets or the gym. And so really this is about creating a sense of welcome and inclusion and belonging. And if we create a culture where we can address these microaggressions, then hopefully we will have approached a more inclusive ethic for our church community. And so I want to leave that right there. And I think that the next thing in our presentation is a video. Is that right, Dee?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, for getting us started on this journey this evening. Brett, is Mary with us to show the videos?
Yes.
Okay, well, what we have next then is a video that it's a TED Talk video where minorities shares what it's like in their experience to be on the receiving end of some of these microaggressions. So I'll let Mary bring up that video as soon as she's ready to.
The tall guy, the fast girl, the smart student, the autistic kid. Why do we use these definitions? Why should a difference define you? Surely there is more to you than just one difference. Why should just one make you stand out? Students of color in a predominantly white school ask themselves these questions every day. In their case, it's, why should my race define me? This question is often spurred by various experiences with microaggressions. A quick Google search will yield the dictionary definition of microaggression, which states a statement, action, or incident, regarded as an instance of subtle, indirect, or unintentional discrimination against a marginalized group, such as a racial minority. Now, although this definition is logically thorough, it does not account for how significantly microaggressions affect students of color. They have the prefix micro attached, but any student of color could tell you that microaggressions feel like they're anything but micro. As students of color go through their days, they are faced with these microaggressions that hinder them from having the most positive high school experience possible. This should never be the case. This is the story of students of color in a predominantly white school where a major problem is microaggressions. Now, I want to show you exactly what it looks like to have to go through your day with microaggressions. So, allow me to take you through a day in the life of students of color in their predominantly white school. Let's take one student, for example. We'll call her Kayla. Kayla is an athlete, artist, scholar, and friend. Again, many other things can define a person other than their race. Now, when Kayla wakes up in the morning, she prepares for the day just like any other high school student. She wakes up, gets out of bed, eats some breakfast, and leaves to start her day. But as soon as Kayla steps through the door of her school, she changes the way she carries herself. For example, one morning, when I saw Kayla and her mom pull up in front of the school to drop her off, I saw Kayla hurriedly remove the scarf she was wearing from her head, as if to avoid appearing ghetto. Kayla essentially puts on a mask when entering into her predominantly white school because she's been taught that behaving in a way she's accustomed to at home is inferior to the much more professional demeanor she has to put on at school. This burden of a mask is faced for our students of color before any microaggressions are even experienced. During first period that day, my friend Ava and some of her friends are heading to their first period science class. As Ava and her friends are getting settled down and getting ready for class, I hear a white peer call out from across the room to Ava, "How do you keep your hair clean if you don't wash it every day?" You could hear a pin drop in that room after that question was asked. It was dead silent. And you could see that Ava was visibly overwhelmed. She felt like she was left on an island to fend for herself. This, ladies and gentlemen, is our first example of a microaggression. The white peer that asked Ava about her hair holds a subtle, disrespectful undertone that you can see as Ava awkwardly fidgets about and tries to figure out how to respond to this question. But the problem is, she doesn't know how to respond. She's stuck. And so the whole class turns their heads towards Ava and watches as she awkwardly stumbles through an explanation of why she only needs to wash her hair once a week. And now, Ava's morning is off to the worst start she could possibly imagine. Later that morning, my friend Dante and I are in our English class, where Dante raises his hand to answer a question he just knew he had the right answer to. But when Dante raises his hand, he slips up on his code switching momentarily. Code switching here is changing the way you speak based on your environment. Here, a predominantly white environment. See, Dante meant to say, the characters didn't wish to keep going because they knew that the journey would be too hard. But instead, he said, they didn't want to keep going because they knew it was about to be too hard, you feel me? As soon as Dante said this, the white peer sitting across from us said to him, why do you talk like that? With this microaggression, Dante is stunned. He doesn't understand. This is how he speaks. This is how he's always spoken. Nothing has changed. And then Dante does something I will never forget. He pulls out a copy of his favorite essay titled, Should Writers Use Their Own English? By Rashawn Ashanti Young. And using this piece, he explains how the standard language ideology, or the belief in one set of language rules that everyone must conform to, dominates our society. And later that day at lunch, Dante tells me that he realized that white peer asked about his dialect because the standard or ideal in our society has been made synonymous with whites. It's funny how just one microaggression could yield such a heavy realization. After our lunch that day, our friend Will is in his music class, where he's confronted by a white peer who is shocked to hear that Will knows every single song off of Paramore's, an American rock band's, latest album. Now, anyone close to Will knows that he is the biggest fan of rock music, but he doesn't often talk about it. Mostly because when a fellow student of color sitting behind Will overhears this conversation, he says to Will, man, you listen to white people music. After school that day, I told Will that the issues don't just come from white students. And more importantly, the last time I checked, music didn't have a color. Finally, the bell rings, and our friend Tanya is sitting on a track and getting ready for her track meeting. Now, Tanya wasn't talking to anybody, and she was waiting and stretching to get ready for her meet, when a white peer from the opposing team comes up to her and says, well, I have no chance against you. You're clearly going to be faster. Confused, Tanya tells me that it just doesn't stop. It doesn't matter where she goes because microaggressions always seem to find a way to follow her. Tanya tells me that she can run from microaggressions all she wants, but ultimately, she thinks this is one race she can't win. By the time Kayla, Ava, Dante, Will, and Tanya get home in the evening, they are fed up from a long day of dealing with microaggressions. They are more uncomfortable than ever, and they can already see more negative effects lining themselves up. The effects to their mental health are the most significant. Being subject to these derogatory microaggressions gives our 5 scholars a taste of the imposter syndrome. This is the inability to internalize one's own success because they feel as though they don't belong or are undeserving. I can see this when Dante asks, do I really belong here? Do I really deserve to be here? Another contributor to our mental health issues for our students of color is the labeling theory. This is the idea that the more you tell someone what they're supposed to be, or the more you label them, the more likely they are to fulfill that label. So when a white peer asks Will, why are children of color's parents so much more detached from their lives? Will is that much more likely to feed into that negative stereotype of parenthood for people of color. Academically, the imposter syndrome is causing motivation in the classroom to crumble. I can see this when Kalis asks me, if I don't belong here, then what's the point in trying? It is this negative mindset that sets our students of color on a negative spiral in their future. Socially, students of color feel even more isolated by microaggressions. I can see this when I see my fellow students of color sitting together in somewhat secluded areas during school hours. Now, this isn't them being defiant or being antisocial, but rather it's students of color feeling uncomfortable around a white majority where microaggressions are often experienced. Why should students of color have to endure this? Why should race be their defining characteristic? The answer is simple. It shouldn't. You are the best person to define yourself. And no matter how hard they may try, microaggressions cannot do this for you. So, ask yourself, who do I want to be?
Okay, there's the video describing what it's like to be on the receiving end of these. What we're going to do now is shift over to a Q&A, question and answer, with Jennifer for about 8-10 minutes here. Any questions from about Jennifer's comments or about something you heard in the video? Here's your chance to ask Jennifer and get some initial responses. You can raise your hand in chat or type it in chat, or probably should do that given the number of people we have here. And I think Mary's going to feed the questions to Jennifer, unless Jennifer wants to monitor them herself here, either way.
Might mention how people raise their hand using the reactions.
Yep. Thank you. Elisa.
First off, I want to say that I'm new here and I didn't realize that this was for adults. Would you rather me stay here or would you rather me leave?
I would say my answer would be this is not for adults only.
Oh, okay.
This
I'm
is for
new
anybody
here.
who thinks this might be a valuable
Yeah.
thing to learn about.
Yeah, well, earlier I heard you talking about the adult committee, so I thought that this was for adults.
No, it's for anybody. We
okay.
love having a
So-
wider age range. Let's put it that way.
Okay. And so, I came here because I wanted to learn more about microaggressions, and I think it would be beneficial for me to learn how I am using microaggressions against people and how to do that less. So my question is, even if you're well-meaning, how can you make sure for certain that you're paying attention to how microaggressions might come off?
That's a good question. And I think that I would say that because you're asking that question is a good sign that you're already paying attention to what words that you use, because words are very powerful. And at the same time that you are conscious of what words you use, I would say that we have to first and foremost remember that we're engaging people and that relationships can't happen without engagement. And so it's important as we walk into relationships and engaging people that we realize that none of us are without flaw, and all of us have said something that we regretted You know, at some point in our lives, we've all said something that later on we regretted. And so we have to remember that while we don't want to do these things, they are going to happen. And so really, if we can gain skills for how to navigate that scenario, I think it's more useful than, first of all, avoiding engagement. You know, I don't want to encourage anybody to avoid engaging because they might say a microaggression, but to go ahead and enter into the engagement, knowing that you're going into it aware and with good intentions, because you always have that. You always know that you have good intentions. And then having tools in your tool belt for the time that it does happen, that would not be a barrier to further engagement. But maybe the tools can help you and the person get to a deeper level of connection like that. And so I think that's really what this is about. You know, how can we get past the fact that there is racism and that we're all subject to it because it's ingrained in the systems that we are a part of. And so now that we're just all on the same field of, okay, it's there, then we want to be responsible and try not to do it. But when we do it, let's do it in a way that is brings dignity back as much as possible, so they both can win out of the situation and not both lose, or one lose and one win, and, you know, make something out of the situation.
Yeah, and I just want to like say that I love what you guys are doing, because this is actually my first time coming to a roundtable. I live in Edmond and I go to another church currently, but I'm looking for LGBT friendly churches that I can go to for when I move out for college, because I'm planning to go to OU. And so I was looking for LGBT friendly churches in Norman, and I happened to come across you guys' church, and I found your website, and I found you on Facebook, and I saw that there was this Zoom on microaggressions, and I thought that I would come and kind of check it out and see what you guys are all about.
Very glad you did. I'm very glad you did.
Yeah, and so I'm planning on coming here after I move out for college.
Well, I know that you've got a lot of people smiling and just really proud that you're even with us this evening. So thank you.
All right, well, I'll let somebody else have some time now, because I've took up quite a bit of time. I don't want to take any more time away from anybody else. But thank you for answering my question.
I've got a question from Sandy Morforno. I would like to ask about terms. A couple of her friends who are Black have asked to not use the term minorities because it's diminishing and rapidly becoming untrue. They prefer Black and brown people or people of color. What does Jennifer think about the use of minorities or minority versus other terms? And could minorities be perceived as microaggression arising out of the systemic racism of our society?
My response to that is that I've seen several critiques of very popular books, even including White Fragility, that sense of loss of agency, which might go with that word minority, that we don't want to underestimate anyone's or any group's sense of agency and capacity to do anything, really. And so I don't think that it's helpful to pick certain words out of our vocabulary and like mark them as words not to use. I think that's more in terms of like being politically correct as opposed to like being politically conscious, because I think a lot of that is on an individual case by case basis of what people find offensive. You know, I don't know if somebody's going to be offended if I call them Black and they want to be called African American. But we all know that like politically correct, it's politically incorrect to use the N word, for example. Okay, so I would just, for myself, my own practice is that I would shy away from limiting myself so much from certain words, and just know that overall, the overall arching theme is that perhaps that sentiment of lack of agency might be related to that, because there's a whole lot of agency in these communities that we are somewhat unfamiliar with, that we don't enter very often. And there's a sense of, with our white privilege, that we're benevolent, and the power dynamics there don't change when we don't give full credit for agency. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Good. All right. Let me just interject here. Dee, we've got 5 minutes over our time frames, and maybe we should go ahead and transition.
Okay, we'll do that there. What we're going to do now with a little introduction here is shift over to getting ready for this small group activity. When we were planning this roundtable, we thought it would be good to have a substantial segment that we ended up calling a guided practicum. A practicum in the sense that it gives us a chance to practice being in a situation where a microaggression may have occurred, and if so, then how to respond to it. So what we're going to be doing is put you into groups of 7 or so here in just a few minutes. Each group is going to have a group leader who will moderate this small group breakout segment of this for the next 30 minutes or so. What the group leader will do will walk you through 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how fast they go, of the scenarios that were described on one of those handouts that we sent around. Let's see if I got the name of it here. It'll be the sheet that starts with scenarios for discussion and role play. The discussions that Jennifer talked about a little while ago, the 3 questions are discussed at the top, but below those are 4 scenarios, and your group leader will pick 1 or 2 or 3 of those for you, and then people will talk about them and then possibly role play them. Let's see, what else do we need to say about that? Okay, when Brent puts us into these small groups just imminently here, he may need a half a minute or a minute to get all the group leaders in the right section, because he's going to use the Zoom thing for automatic breakout. And if we get more than 1 leader in one group, he's going to have to move those around. But is there anything else I need to mention, Brent, about going in here? Then we'll just let the group leaders take charge of that group, and we'll reconvene as a whole group right around 4:25. All we'll have after that is a wrap up, but the rest of the program is going to be in this small group breakout guided practicum. Anything else? Are we ready to go, Brent?
I think we're ready.
Okay.
Just to note, let Mary know, watching that second video.
Yeah. Oh, we want to do that. We want to do that before we go. I'm sorry. Thank you. We do want to do that before we go into the small group, because that will be shown to the whole group. Thank you for reminding me about that. I knew we had it and I forgot it here.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do that. Mary, you ready?
This is a video about how to respond, how you might respond if somebody calls you out for committing a microaggression.
Called out and how to apologize. And the thing that inspired this video is recently we've had a lot of celebrities in the media screwing up, getting called out, and then offering faux apologies, like Russell Simmons, Paula Deen, Anthony Weiner, most recently Cheryl Underwood. I wanted to talk about what you're supposed to do when you get called out and the way to apologize so that people believe you and know you're actually committed to change. When I talk about getting called out, what exactly do I mean? It's not just getting your feelings hurt or someone pointing out that you took the last slice of pizza. Getting called out in this context of this video is when you say or do something that upholds the oppression of a marginalized group of people. So for example, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, something that you've said or done that basically is just perpetuating negative stereotypes or ideals that have real consequences. So In my social responsibility video, we talked about why making jokes about really serious issues or minimizing serious issues has negative consequences, but now I want to talk about what happens when that's brought to your attention and how you can successfully apologize and become an ally and now be committed to changing your behavior and doing the right thing. Usually when you call out someone's behavior or something that they've said, the natural reaction is to get defensive. You're so sensitive. I was just joking. My best friend's black. My sister's a lesbian. You are so emotional. You know I didn't mean it that way. Everybody has to be so PC nowadays. Now I can completely understand why people usually react this way. It's because no one wants to be the bad guy. And if you get called out on doing something that's oppressing another group of people, well, that's bad, and no one wants to be bad. But I want to discourage you from going that route, because what you really need to do is listen, because this is where the other person is hopefully going to explain to you what you did wrong and how you can change it. Another thing that people tend to fall back on in these instances is their intent. Oh, I didn't mean it like that, or you're interpreting it the wrong way. In these instances, I know that you might think that that makes a difference, but we're not really worrying about your intent here, because of course you didn't mean to offend anyone. There really aren't that many people that walk around trying to offend people. I mean, there are those people and they're jerks, and why would you want to be friends with those types of people? Your intent really doesn't matter, because it's a matter of intent versus impact. And that's actually something I learned from a really good friend of mine, Jukebox Jones on Facebook. It doesn't matter in these instances what you meant. What matters is what's the outcome of what you said or what you did. I use the example of stepping on somebody's foot. I might step on your foot and break your toe. I didn't mean to break your toe, but your toe is still broken and it still really hurts. So instead of talking about what you meant to do, talk about what you actually did. Which brings me to the next part of this video, good apologies versus bad apologies. Now, the first most common bad non-apology that I hear, I'm sorry that you were offended. That is like the worst non-apology ever, because instead of taking responsibility for your actions, you're putting the blame on the other person and saying that it's your fault that you're offended, not that you did something that offended them. So don't make that mistake. Another one that I hear a lot of times is, I'm sorry if you were offended. That one doesn't cut it either, because the person is offended. So there's no reason to bring up if, and it also doesn't acknowledge what you did wrong and why it was wrong, because you're saying if you were offended, I'm sorry, but if you weren't offended, I'm not sorry. And again, that's not how you do this apology thing. A real genuine apology is made up of two parts. The first part is you take responsibility for what you've done, and then the second part is you make a commitment to change the behavior. It's that simple, and trust me, as someone that's apologized more than a few times, as someone that's been called out more than a few times, it's not really that hard to do. The best way that I can figure out to drive this point home is to give you an example using myself. So about 2 years ago, I made this video called Queen for a Day, where I dressed up as a drag queen, went around New York City and asked people to guess if I was a man or a woman. I thought the video was hysterical. My friends thought it was really funny. It did really well on YouTube. And it wasn't until about a year later that someone brought to my attention that it was super offensive. They were like, hey, this is some transphobic garbage. Why would you do something like this? Now, of course, my initial reaction was to get defensive. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not transphobic. What does that even mean? I have friends that are trans. I didn't mean it that way. It's just a joke. You're taking this too personally. I did all of the things that you're not supposed to do. So instead, I stopped and I listened. And they explained that if you're trans, having people try to figure out what your gender is like a daily battle, and it's not really fun, and it's super rude. And making a video that encourages that and kind of makes a game or something funny out of questioning someone's gender is basically encouraging people to participate in that type of behavior. And that's really, really bad, especially when you consider the fact that there are trans people who are regularly assaulted and murdered because people are trying to question and figure out how they identify. So once this was brought to my attention, I was like, you're right. I'm so sorry. Didn't need to talk about what my intent was or why I did it. Instead, I just said, wow, I'm really sorry. I'm really gonna make sure that I don't do that again. thanks for bringing that to my attention. I ended up taking the video down, and since then I've really made an effort to be more aware of trans issues and try to be a better ally to the trans people in my life and in my online community. And it was surprisingly not that hard or life-changing to admit that I did something wrong. And it felt really good to know that I fixed the problem and that now I'm part of the solution. The first thing that you want to do is acknowledge what went wrong. And I'll use my example of the Queen for a Day video. I am sorry that I perpetuated transphobic behaviors by making a video that trivializes gender identity. It's a little involved. Might not need to go that in depth, but you get the point. Also, when you acknowledge what went wrong, you want to try and make sure to avoid the words but or if, because that puts conditions on your apology or why you did it. And again, we really aren't trying to talk about intent here. Something that I try to do, and I would love to impart on you guys when it comes to sincere apologies, is to say thank you. Just a super simple, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention, because it takes a lot of courage to call somebody out. It's scary and not fun, and it's a great way to like soften the experience a little bit. The last thing to remember when you're making this apology is don't just say it, do it. Remember that actions speak louder than words, and you can say sorry till the cows come home, but if you keep engaging in that sort of behavior or saying those sort of things, then your apology just doesn't really mean anything. Now that you got
Okay, there you got some ideas on how to respond if somebody calls you out on a microaggression here. Okay, Brett, if you can go ahead and put us into our small groups and get the leaders sorted out, we'll begin the next segment here where we get to practice doing some of these things, figuring out how to respond.
All right, great. Okay, I'm going to start creating, it'll just be an automatic, and you'll drop off main session and you'll appear into one of the breakout rooms. Like we'll have 7 breakout rooms.
Action plan that is kind of a reminder of options when you you're confronted, when you find yourself dealing with microaggressions. Could we have a handout of that?
Brett?
Yes, we're going to have a post roundtable group of handouts, and we'll just include the ones that we've already sent, and then there was a 10-week series of examples of microaggressions. So we've got that in a document. We'll attach that. So we'll have a packet of documents that we'll send out here probably later on this evening.
But I know which document you're referring to, and yes, you will get that.
Wonderful, thank you.
It's on page 2 or 3 of. It's called possible responses, but that's on page 2 or 3, I think.
Okay, great,
Oh,
great.
What did Fran have to say? I want to hear it.
Well, Holly, one thing I was going to say is that on the handouts that you already sent us, there are 2 additional pages or 3 that we didn't get to in our small group. So, but that's a resource too.
Yeah.
Also, I just think this has been very good, but it's really clear to me that I need a lot more practice.
Yeah.
And figuring out how not only to be sensitive to doing a microaggression, but also in how to respond to others in those settings. Yeah. And I love the young woman who talked about how to apologize. I thought that was a super video.
Fantastic.
So would you connect that video to the things you're going to send out, the one that Mary put up?
One of the things I've learned as I've been exploring this, especially this past year, is one meeting like this is not nearly enough. And I've actually been participating in a series of anti-racism discussions being conducted by Greenspon Institute for Peace, which is at Queen's University in North Carolina. And that has been fabulous. I have learned so much through that.
I wanted to respond to what you were saying and reiterating the oops, ouch exercise, because assuming that Alyssa is around us more, I think we feel safe in St. Stephen's, in this group of people, And so, a hope is that we will practice with each other. And then also what I was saying in our small group is if you can, watch a show with somebody or listen to a podcast or a news broadcast, anything that you share, you do it together and then have your ears tuned for those problematic statements and then practice based on those problematic statements that you hear, practice with somebody else that you feel safe with.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
I
very good.
agree. Oh, sorry.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I'll definitely be staying connected with St. Stephen's, and I think I finally found my church home.
We're glad to hear that.
Yay. Great.
Hey, everybody.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say to Alyssa, if she starts watching the church services, there are also 9 a.m. Various Bible study groups. So
Yeah, I plan to do that.
find one that you enjoy. There's several to try from. Our group, I think, would welcome you, and you'd fit right in there. So,
as would the youth group.
Yeah. Yeah, I plan on getting really involved because I like I said, I feel like this is my home now. So I kind of want to stay. Well, I'm not kind of, I really want to stay.
Okay, well, we've gone a little bit over to this evening, and thank you all for bearing with us. It went a little over what we normally do, but it's very, we really needed to kind of air out some additional comments. So, but this concludes the Peace Roundtable for 2021. And just on behalf of our committee, that includes Mary Lee, Dee Fink, Marcy Robertson, and me. Thank you for participating today in this role play. And we've got a lot more to learn about microaggression, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities to do this in committee meetings or any other session or setting. Just a couple of upcoming events I want to mention. Diane Peters, will be leading a discussion group the first week of February on the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So look forward to that. There's still more, I think more people can sign up, so feel free to do that. Also, the newly formed Racial Justice Committee will be meeting soon, and we look forward to partnering with them. Look for more information and activities commemorating the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. This is the 100-year anniversary of it. Last year we had a roundtable on it, but this year is the actual anniversary. And then lastly, just be sure to look for the Shield, our church newsletter, for more ways to connect. Again, thank you. And now I want to let Jeannie have the last word. Jeannie, are you still on?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm here. Okay. Well, I just want to send you all forth into the evening, which is now just become a rainy evening, I think, knowing that the steps to overcoming the various barriers between us, step one is to recognize that there are barriers and what they look like. And so we're on that journey together, and we're all arm in arm as we join in this effort to increase understanding and decrease hurt and alienation. So go with peace, go with God. Amen.